Welcome to Ancient Civilizations, where history comes to life, mysteries are unraveled, and untold stories find their voice. Our documentaries take you through immersive videos through time, revealing the wonders of ancient civilizations, the marvels of human achievement, and the depths of natural and cultural mysteries, as well as the ugly moments, stories of strength, power, selfishness, and above all, human indifference. And today we will chronicle the bloodiest battles in history, in terms of human casualties and the most deadly and devastating. We will begin the video with the Battle of Kalinga. The Kalinga War. It was the year 261 BCE, during the reign of Emperor Ashoka Maurya, a ruler whose empire stretched across the vast Indian subcontinent. Yet amid his greatness and conquests, one region had escaped his grasp: Kalinga, a prosperous kingdom located on the eastern coast of India. Known for its wealth, maritime trade, and fierce independence, Kalinga stood as a proud beacon of freedom, refusing to bow to the Mauryan Empire. For years, Ashoka's ambitions had simmered. The emperor, often referred to as Devanampriya, beloved of the gods, was determined to complete his rule. He saw Kalinga as a jewel that would cement his legacy as ruler of all India. With this determination, he assembled an army so vast that it seemed to blot out the horizontal force of infantry, cavalry, war elephants, and chariots numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The people of Kalinga, led by their king and council of elders, knew the storm was coming. They were not naive about the might of the Mauryan army, but neither were they cowards. Farmers took up swords. Fishermen turned their nets into traps. Merchants contributed wealth to finance the defenses. They stood united, not as a professional army, but as a resolute people willing to die for their freedom. Ashoka's envoys were rebuffed. His demands for surrender met with silence. The emperor's patience ran out, and he gave the order: Kalinga would be crushed. The battle took place near the banks of the Daya River, a serene scene that would soon run red with blood. Ashoka's war elephants thundered forward, their tusks adorned with deadly blades. His infantry advanced in disciplined waves, shields locked, spears gleaming in the sunlight. The people of Kalinga fought with unmatched bravery, their smaller numbers offset by their determination. Women fought alongside men, children carried water to the wounded, and elders rallied the combatants with shouts of defiance. For days, the earth shook with the sounds of war. Soldiers fell by the thousands, their screams lost in the cacophony of clashing steel and roaring elephants. The Daya River bore witness to human carnage, its once clear waters mingling with the blood of the dead and dying. When the dust settled, Ashoka had triumphed. Kalinga was defeated, its defenses destroyed, and its people devastated. The death toll was staggering: more than 100,000 killed in battle, with another 150,000 deported or enslaved. The survivors, a fraction of Kalinga's population, wandered the devastated land in despair. Ashoka rode across the battlefield to witness his conquest. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. The bodies of men, women, and children lay strewn across the plains. Villages were reduced to ashes. The mourners' cries pierced the silence of victory. The emperor, once so proud of his power, felt the weight of his actions press down on his soul. That night, Ashoka could not sleep. The faces of the dead haunted him, their eyes accusing him of unspeakable cruelty. The emperor, who had built his empire through conquest, began to question the purpose of it all. Was power worth the price of so much suffering? In the months that followed, Ashoka's transformation began. He turned to Buddhism, seeking solace and answers. The teachings of compassion, nonviolence, and righteousness resonated with him. In an unprecedented act of repentance, Ashoka renounced war and vowed to rule his empire with justice and mercy. He issued edicts proclaiming the sanctity of all life and spread the message of Dhamma, the moral law, throughout his vast kingdom. The Kalinga War became a defining moment in Indian history. It marked the end of Ashoka's conquests and the beginning of his reign as a benevolent and enlightened ruler. The emperor, who had once sought to dominate by force, now sought to unify through peace. Yet the memory of the war lingered. For the people of Kalinga, it was a tragedy that spoke of their strength and sacrifice. For Ashoka, it was a lesson in the futility of violence. And for the world, it was a story of transformation, where the ashes of destruction gave rise to the light of compassion. The Daya River still flows, its waters a silent witness to the war that changed an emperor and inspired a legacy of peace. The Battle of Salsu. The year was 612 AD, and the Goguryeo kingdom faced its gravest threat yet. The powerful Sui Empire of China, under Emperor Yang, had launched a massive campaign to conquer the Korean peninsula. The Sui army, numbering over 1 million soldiers, was one of the most formidable forces the ancient world had ever seen. Their goal was clear: to crush Goguryeo, the kingdom that had stood as a bulwark against Chinese expansion. Goguryeo, led by General Ulji Mundeok, was outnumbered and outnumbered. The Sui emperor, confident of victory, sent wave after wave of his vast army across the Yalu River into Goguryeo territory. However, the Goguryeo people, hardened by their mountainous homeland and fierce spirit, were determined to defend their sovereignty. The Sui campaign began with overwhelming force. Their armies, supported by engineers and supplies, marched through Goguryeo's defenses, capturing fortresses and burning villages. The Goguryeo military adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation and drawing the enemy deeper into their lands. General Ulji Mundeok understood that the size of the Sui army was both its strength and its weakness. He employed hit-and-run tactics, attacking supply lines and retreating before the Sui could respond. Frustration grew within the Sui ranks as their progress slowed, and their soldiers grew tired and hungry. The Sui army finally reached the banks of the Salsu River, present-day Chongchon River, a critical choke point. The river was wide and seemingly calm, an ideal crossing point for their massive force. On the opposite bank, the Goguryeo forces waited, outnumbered but unfazed. General Ulji Mundeok had prepared a brilliant plan. The Salsu River was dammed upstream, its water level reduced to appear deceptively shallow. The Sui army, desperate to cross and press their advantage, began to ford the river. By the time the bulk of the Sui forces had entered the water, the dam was breached. A roaring flood rushed down the river, sweeping away tens of thousands of soldiers in an instant. Those who survived the torrent found themselves disoriented and vulnerable on the opposite bank, where the Goguryeo warriors lay in wait. Ulji Mundeok launched a fierce counterattack, his soldiers striking with the precision and ferocity of a cornered tiger. The Sui army, already weakened by weeks of attrition, was thrown into chaos. Exhausted, hungry, and demoralized, they were unable to withstand the Goguryeo onslaught. The Battle of Salsu was a catastrophe for the Sui. Of the nearly 300,000 soldiers who crossed into Goguryeo, only a fraction returned to their homeland. The riverbanks were littered with the bodies of drowned and fallen soldiers. General Ulji Mundeok's cunning strategy not only decimated the Sui army, but also destroyed its morale. News of the defeat reached Emperor Yang, whose dreams of subjugating Goguryeo were turned to bitter ashes. The staggering losses undermined the stability of his rule, sowing dissent and rebellion throughout the Sui Empire. The victory at Salsu was not just a military triumph, it was a testament to the indomitable spirit of Goguryeo. Against impossible odds, they defended their homeland and preserved its independence. General Ulji Mundeok emerged as a national hero, his name etched in history. The Sui, crippled by the failed campaign, would never again mount a full-scale invasion of Goguryeo. Indeed, the loss at Salsu contributed to the eventual downfall of the Sui dynasty itself, as internal conflicts and rebellions grew in the wake of the empire's humiliating defeat. For the Goguryeo people, the Salsu River became a place of pride and mourning, its flowing waters a silent witness to one of the most decisive battles in their history. The sacrifice of thousands ensured the survival of their kingdom, and the toll of their resistance has echoed for generations. The Battle of Salsu remains a stark reminder of the power of strategy, determination, and the cost of ambition. It was a battle in which a small but united people faced a vast empire and prevailed, leaving behind a tale of defiance, that reverberates through the annals of history. The Battle of Didgori. In the summer of 1121 CE, the Kingdom of Georgia was on the brink of annihilation. The Seljuk Empire, a vast and powerful force that controlled much of the Islamic world, sought to crush the growing Christian kingdom. The Seljuk Sultan Mahmud II assembled a massive army, an estimated 200,000 to 350,000 soldiers from across his empire. This force included seasoned warriors, mercenaries, and fanatics drawn by the promise of victory and plunder. King David IV of Georgia, known as David the Builder, spent years reforming his army and solidifying his kingdom. But against the Seljuk tide, his force numbered only 55,000, including a mix of Georgian regulars, feudal troops, crusader knights from Europe, and Kipchak mercenaries. Outnumbered nearly 6-1, David faced what seemed like an insurmountable challenge. Yet he was undeterred. The Seljuk host invaded Georgian lands, their banners blocking the horizon as they advanced toward the Georgian heartland. Their goal was to crush the Christian kingdom and reassert Seljuk dominance in the Caucasus. Reports of the enemy's overwhelming numbers reached David, but rather than retreat, he devised a bold plan to strike first. The site of the confrontation would be the Didgori Valley, a narrow, mountainous terrain that favored cunning rather than brute force. David understood that this battlefield would neutralize much of the Seljuks' numerical advantage. On the morning of August 12, 1121, David deployed his troops. His main force formed a defensive line in the valley, while smaller contingents hid in the surrounding hills. The Seljuks, confident in their numbers, advanced into the valley, their massive army filling the narrow space. At the critical moment, David sprang his ambush. The Georgian forces descended from the hills, crashing into the Seljuk flanks. The confined terrain made the Seljuks' massive numbers a disadvantage. Their soldiers could not maneuver or position themselves effectively. David himself led the charge with his elite cavalry, cutting through the Seljuk ranks with brutal efficiency. The Georgian warriors fought with a mixture of discipline and ferocity, their smaller numbers offset by superior coordination and the element of surprise. Panic spread through the Seljuk ranks as their formations disintegrated under the relentless Georgian onslaught. Soldiers who had previously marched with confidence now fought desperately to escape the valley. The Georgian forces gave no quarter, cutting down their enemies in a stunning display of martial prowess. By the end of the day, the Seljuk army was annihilated. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of Seljuks were killed, with the remainder fleeing in disarray. The death toll, combined with the destruction of Seljuk prestige, was catastrophic. The Battle of Didgori became known as the Miraculous Victory, a testament to the courage and leadership of King David IV. Against all odds, the Georgians secured one of the most decisive victories in medieval history. The Seljuk threat to Georgia was destroyed, and David's kingdom entered a golden age of expansion and prosperity. David credited the victory to divine intervention, but his strategic brilliance and the unyielding spirit of his people were undeniable. The Didgori Valley has become a symbol of Georgian resilience and unity, its soil hallowed by the blood of those who fought for their homeland. The Battle of Didgori is remembered not only as a military triumph, but as a defining moment in Georgian identity. It was the day a small kingdom defied an empire and prevailed, securing its place in history. To this day, Georgians honor the battle as a source of pride and inspiration. The Didgori Valley still stands, its silent hills a silent witness to the clash of civilizations, the cries of battle, and the resounding victory of a king who dared to dream of a united and sovereign Georgia. The Battle of Yehuling. In the early 13th century, the steppes of Central Asia trembled under the rise of a fearsome power, the Mongols, led by their indomitable leader, Genghis Khan. By 1210 CE, the once fragmented and warlike Mongol tribes had united under their banner, forming a ferocious war machine that sought to expand its rule. Its target was the Jin dynasty, a wealthy and powerful empire in northern China that had long dominated the region. The Jin emperor, Wanyan Yongji, underestimated the threat posed by the Mongols, His court dismissed the Mongols as little more than barbarian invaders, incapable of challenging his fortified cities and disciplined armies. But Genghis Khan, with his keen strategic mind and ruthless ambition, was about to prove them fatally wrong. In 1210, Genghis Khan declared war on the Jin. Their grievances were many: insults to their envoys, the Jin's refusal to recognize Mongol supremacy, and a desire for the riches of the Chinese heartland. The Mongol army, though smaller in numbers than the Jin forces, was a force of unmatched mobility and discipline. Their cavalry, armed with composite bows and honed by years of warfare on the steppes, was the deadliest in the world. The Jin, on the other hand, fielded a massive army numbering over 500,000 soldiers. But their forces were stretched thin, overstretched by internal corruption and divided loyalties. Wanyan Yongji believed that sheer numbers and the natural defenses of the rugged Yehuling region would halt the Mongol advance. Yehuling, a mountainous area in present-day Hebei province, was a natural choke point. The Jin army fortified the region, intending to use the narrow passes to bottle up and destroy the Mongols. Confident in their position, the Jin forces awaited their enemy, unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. Genghis Khan, however, was no ordinary commander. He studied the terrain and devised a plan to overcome the Jin defenses. Dividing his forces, he sent one contingent to feign a frontal attack, luring the Jin into battle and trapping their forces in the narrow valleys. Meanwhile, another Mongol force, led by Subutai, one of his most trusted generals, executed a daring flanking maneuver through unguarded mountain trails. The Mongols struck with devastating precision. The Jin army, caught between a frontal assault and a flanking attack, fell into disarray. Their numbers, once a source of confidence, became a liability as soldiers trampled one another in their chaotic retreat. The Mongols showed no mercy. Their cavalry pursued the fleeing Jin soldiers relentlessly, slaughtering tens of thousands as they tried to escape the mountain passes. The massive Jin army, which had been the pride of the empire, was annihilated. By the end of the battle, nearly 500,000 Jin soldiers had been killed or captured. The slopes and valleys of the Yehuling Mountains were covered with the bodies of the fallen, a grim testament to the scale of the massacre. The catastrophic defeat at Yehuling destroyed the Jin dynasty's ability to resist the Mongols. Their once mighty empire crumbled under the relentless Mongol onslaught. In the years that followed, the Mongols swept through Jin territory, capturing cities and subjugating the population. In 1234, the Jin dynasty was extinguished, its lands absorbed into the expanding Mongol Empire. The Battle of Yehuling was a turning point in the Mongol-Jin War and a harbinger of the unstoppable rise of the Mongols. Genghis Khan's victory demonstrated the effectiveness of his strategies and the adaptability of his forces, qualities that would enable the Mongols to conquer vast areas of the known world. For the Jin, Yehuling became a symbol of hubris and failure, a lesson in the dangers of underestimating an enemy. For the Mongols, it was a triumph that solidified their reputation as an invincible force, paving the way for their domination of China and beyond. The once peaceful valleys and ridges of Yehuling bore the scars of epic battle. Centuries later, the winds that swept through those mountains seemed to carry the whispers of screams, the clash of steel, and the thunder of hooves, a haunting echo of the day when empires clashed and history was made. The Battle of Huai-Hai. The winter of 1948 was harsh, its winds carrying the scent of revolution across the Chinese countryside. After years of brutal conflict, the Chinese Civil War had reached a turning point. The forces of the nationalist Kuomintang KMT, under the command of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, faced off against the Chinese Communist Party CCP, led by Mao Zedong and his top generals. The stage was set for the Battle of Huai-Hai, a showdown that would determine the fate of China. The KMT, armed and supported by the United States, fielded an army of nearly 800,000 soldiers, equipped with modern weapons and armored vehicles. The CCP, though lacking in material resources, commanded an army of nearly 600,000 soldiers, hardened by years of guerrilla warfare and fueled by ideological zeal. Around them, Millions of peasants, motivated by promises of land reform and liberation, would play a pivotal role in the coming conflict. The Huai-Hai region, a flat expanse of fields and rivers stretching across eastern China, became the focal point of the campaign. Control of this area would secure control over crucial supply lines and determine who would claim Nanjing, the KMT capital. Both sides knew that this was more than a battle, it was a fight for the soul of a nation. The communist strategy was simple but bold: divide and annihilate. Mao's generals, including Su Yu, Chen Yi, and Liu Bosheng, meticulously planned to encircle and destroy the nationalist armies one by one. The communists relied on mobility, deception, and overwhelming support from the local population to counter the nationalists' superior numbers and technology. The campaign began in November 1948, with communist forces launching surprise attacks on isolated nationalist units. Using their knowledge of the terrain, they cut off the KMT's supply lines, encircling tens of thousands of soldiers. Nationalist attempts to relieve their trapped forces failed, as communist troops, supported by thousands of peasants transporting supplies and digging trenches, repelled counterattacks. The siege of Suzhou, a key city in the region, marked a turning point. With KMT forces trapped inside, communist troops tightened their grip, depriving the defenders of food, ammunition, and reinforcements. Desperation grew within the nationalist ranks, as morale plummeted under the relentless communist attacks. As winter deepened, the battle intensified. The communists launched coordinated offensives, overwhelming one nationalist army after another. The Huai-Hai camps were transformed into killing fields, littered with soldiers' bodies and destroyed equipment. The nationalist leadership, plagued by internal divisions and corruption, struggled to respond. Chiang Kai-shek's orders often conflicted with the decisions of his field commanders, and distrust within the KMT ranks further undermined their efforts. In contrast, the communists operated with unity and purpose. Mao's vision of a people's war became a reality, as millions of peasants supported the Red Army, transporting supplies, building fortifications, and even joining the fight. The KMT found itself fighting not only communist soldiers, but also an entire population rising up against them. By January 1949, the KMT's position at Huai-Hai was untenable. Its forces, surrounded and starving, began to surrender en masse. Entire divisions disintegrated as soldiers abandoned their posts or defected to the communists. The communists claimed a decisive victory, capturing over 550,000 KMT soldiers and vast quantities of equipment. The KMT's losses were catastrophic, not only in manpower but in morale and prestige. The battle broke the back of the nationalist war effort, paving the way for the communist capture of Nanjing and the eventual proclamation of the People's Republic of China. The Battle of Huai-Hai was one of the largest and bloodiest battles of the 20th century, with over 600,000 casualties. It marked the turning point in the Chinese Civil War, securing the communist victory and reshaping the political landscape of East Asia. For the millions who lived through the battle, it was a time of unimaginable suffering and upheaval. Villages were destroyed, families torn apart, and the land scarred by the horrors of war. Yet for the communists, it was a moment of triumph, of their strategy and the power of popular support. The Battle of Changping. In 260 BCE, during the tumultuous warring states period of ancient China, the rival states of Qin and Zhao clashed in one of the deadliest battles in history. The Battle of Changping, fought over 4 brutal years, would not only reshape the balance of power in China, but also leave a lasting mark on the hearts of its people. The state of Qin, under the rule of King Zhaoshang, emerged as the most powerful of the 7 warring states. His ambition to unify China was no secret, and his military reforms created an army of unparalleled discipline and strength. Meanwhile, the state of Zhao, ruled by King Xiaocheng, was one of Qin's strongest rivals, boasting a proud military tradition and an army that had held its own against many enemies. At the center of the conflict was Shangdang, a strategically vital territory whose allegiance had shifted from Zhao to Qin. The Zhao army moved quickly to reclaim the region, and Qin responded with equal ferocity, setting the stage for an epic clash. The battle began with a prolonged siege. Zhao's initial commander, Liang Po, adopted a defensive strategy, fortifying his army and avoiding direct engagement with Qin forces. His cautious tactics frustrated Qin, but they also prolonged the conflict, draining Zhao's resources and morale. Qin, under his brilliant general Bai Qi, recognized an opportunity to exploit Zhao's impatience. Bai Qi, known for his ruthless precision, devised a strategy to lure the Zhao army into a trap. In Zhao, political intrigue proved fatal. Critics of Liang Po's cautious approach persuaded King Xiaocheng to replace him with Zhao Kuo, a young and inexperienced commander. Zhao Kuo, confident in his abilities and eager for glory, immediately abandoned the defensive strategy, leading the Zhao army into open battle. This was exactly what Bai Qi had predicted. As Zhao Kuo marched his massive force of 450,000 soldiers towards Changping, Bai Qi moved to encircle them. Using the terrain to his advantage, he cut off Zhao's supply lines and surrounded his army. The trapped Zhao army faced a harrowing ordeal. For 46 days they endured starvation, disease, and constant harassment from the Qin forces. Bai Qi tightened the noose, refusing to allow any chance of escape. Desperation consumed the Zhao soldiers. Attempts to break through the Qin lines were met with devastating counterattacks. Supplies ran out, morale collapsed, and the once proud Zhao army was reduced to a pitiful state. In the final phase of the battle, Zhao Kuo was killed in a desperate charge. Leaderless and starving, the Zhao soldiers surrendered. But Bai Qi, known for his ruthless nature, showed no mercy. Fearing that sparing the Zhao army would allow them to fight another day, he ordered the mass execution of the 400,000 Zhao prisoners. Tied up and defenseless, they were slaughtered in cold blood, their bodies piled in mass graves. The rivers near Changping ran red with blood, and the fields became a horrific tableau of death. The Battle of Changping was a decisive victory for Qin, but it came at an unimaginable cost. Nearly 700,000 lives were lost, making it one of the deadliest battles in human history. The state of Zhao never fully recovered from the defeat, and its eventual fall to Qin was sealed. For Qin, the victory was a crucial step toward the unification of China under the Qin dynasty. But the massacre at Changping cast a long shadow, a testament to the cruelty of war and the price of ambition. The Changping Plains became a silent monument to the horrors of the warring states period. For centuries, poets and historians have chronicled the tragedy, warning of the devastating consequences of greed and arrogance. The battle remains a haunting chapter in Chinese history, a moment when the quest for power led to unimaginable carnage, and the ambitions of kings were written in the blood of their people. The Battle of Wuhan. In the summer of 1938, the city of Wuhan was the beating heart of China's resistance against the relentless advance of the Japanese Empire. Nestled at the confluence of the Yangtze and Han rivers, Wuhan was more than a strategic hub. It was a symbol of hope for a nation on the brink of collapse. The battle that unfolded there became one of the largest and bloodiest conflicts of the Second Sino-Japanese War, leaving nearly 1 million dead in its wake. By 1938, the Imperial Japanese Army had swept across much of northern and eastern China, capturing major cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing. The Chinese nationalist government, led by Chiang Kai-shek, moved to Wuhan, making it the de facto wartime capital. The city, with its industrial base, transportation networks, and morale-boosting symbolism, became a prize that the Japanese were determined to capture. The Chinese, aware of the importance of Wuhan, vowed to defend it at all costs. More than 1 million troops were mobilized, along with countless civilian volunteers. The Japanese committed more than 350,000 troops, supported by tanks, artillery, and air power. The stage was set for a battle of staggering proportions, lasting 4 months and covering an area of more than 1,000 square miles. In June 1938, the Japanese launched their offensive, attacking from the north, east, and south. Their strategy was a classic example of an encirclement. the aim being to trap and annihilate the Chinese defenders. The Chinese, under General Huai and other commanders, put up a fierce resistance, using rivers, mountains, and urban areas to their advantage. Villages became fortresses, and every river crossing was contested. From the sky, Japanese bombers rained destruction on Chinese positions and civilians, causing unimaginable suffering. The battle quickly turned into a war of attrition. In the scorching summer heat, soldiers and civilians endured starvation, disease, and relentless attacks. Entire villages were burned to the ground, and the Yangtze River became a battlefield, with naval clashes and desperate crossings under enemy fire. As the Japanese pressed their advance, Chiang Kai-shek made a desperate decision: to destroy the Yellow River levees. The resulting flood inundated vast areas of central China, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians and soldiers. Although the flood slowed the Japanese advance, it also brought immense suffering to the very people the Chinese government sought to protect. The floodwaters turned the land into a quagmire, bogging down both sides and adding another layer of horror to an already devastating conflict. Survivors struggled to find dry ground, and disease spread like wildfire among the displaced. Despite the odds, the Chinese defenders fought with unparalleled tenacity. Wuhan's industrial areas produced weapons and supplies, while civilians built fortifications, transported ammunition, and even took up arms. The city became a crucible of resistance, embodying the Chinese spirit of defiance. Japanese attempts to breach Wuhan's defenses were met with fierce resistance. Urban combat turned every street into a killing field, with Chinese soldiers ambushing Japanese troops in alleys and buildings. The cost of every inch of ground was measured in blood. In October 1938, after months of brutal fighting, Wuhan could hold out no longer. The Japanese finally broke through the last lines of defense, capturing the city. Smoke and ash filled the air as retreating Chinese forces set fire to anything that might help the enemy. For the Japanese, the capture of Wuhan was a Pyrrhic victory. Their army had suffered heavy casualties and was now scattered across a vast and hostile country. For the Chinese, the loss of Wuhan was devastating, but it was not the end of the war. The Battle of Wuhan was a turning point in the Second Sino-Japanese War. While it marked another territorial gain for Japan, it also demonstrated the resilience and determination of the Chinese people. The protracted battle had tied down Japanese forces, prevented a quick victory, and drew global attention to China's plight. The human cost was staggering. More than 1 million people, soldiers and civilians alike, lost their lives. The rivers and fields around Wuhan were turned into mass graves, and the city itself was left in ruins. The Battle of Wuhan remains a symbol of sacrifice and perseverance. It was a record of the lengths a nation would go to defend its sovereignty and dignity. Although Wuhan fell, the battle gave China precious time to regroup and continue its fight, keeping the dream of freedom alive amid the darkest days of the war. Today, Wuhan is rebuilt and vibrant, its rivers flowing through a city that remembers its history, a city whose resilience in the face of devastation helped shape the destiny of a nation. Battle of the Somme, World War I. The Battle of the Somme, one of the deadliest engagements of the First World War, began on July 1, 1916. It was a moment in history that was meant to break the stalemate of trench warfare on the Western Front, but instead it was etched into the annals of horror and tragedy. As dawn broke, an eerie calm swept across the fields of northern France. British and French forces, determined to destroy the German lines, prepared for an offensive unlike any they had ever seen before. However, what awaited them was not victory, but a nightmare. For days leading up to the battle, Allied artillery bombarded the German trenches, firing more than 1.5 million shells. The goal was simple: to destroy the German defenses and clear the way for an infantry advance. But the plan had a fatal flaw. Many shells were useless, and German troops dug deep, fortified bunkers to weather the storm. When the bombardment ceased, the Germans emerged, shaken but ready. As Allied soldiers emerged from their trenches and began their advance, they found themselves walking into a hailstorm of machine gun fire. The first day of the Somme became the bloodiest in British military history, with more than 57,000 casualties, nearly 20,000 of them dead. The battle dragged on for months through mud, rain, and blood. Soldiers faced not only enemy fire, but also the unforgiving environment. The trenches became quagmires, riddled with disease and despair. The sickening stench of death lingered in the air, as the bodies of fallen comrades lay unburied in no man's land. Tanks, a new weapon of war, made their first appearance at the Somme, but their primitive design led to frequent breakdowns. Despite the odds, the soldiers pressed on, capturing inches of territory at unimaginable cost. By the time the battle ended on 18th of November 1916, the Allies had advanced only about 6 miles. The cost was staggering. More than 1 million men were killed, wounded, or missing. For many, the Somme was a symbol of futility, the epitome of the senseless brutality of war. Yet others argue that it marked a turning point, teaching invaluable lessons in modern warfare. The courage and sacrifice of those who fought in the trenches remains a grim reminder of the human cost of war. Siege of Baghdad. In the year 1258, the city of Baghdad, once the shining heart of the Islamic Golden Age, faced a nightmare unlike anything it had ever known. For more than 5 centuries, Baghdad had stood as a beacon of knowledge, culture, and power, its libraries and scholars shaping the intellectual landscape of the world. But in January of that year, an unstoppable force appeared on its horizon: the Mongol army, led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan. What unfolded was a siege of such brutality that its echoes would reverberate through history for centuries. The Mongols approached Baghdad with a ruthless efficiency that had already decimated countless cities across Asia and the Middle East. Hulagu's army, estimated at over 100,000 men, was a war machine honed to perfection. On the other side stood the Abbasid Caliphate, weakened by years of internal strife and overconfidence. Caliph al-Mustasim, believing that Baghdad's walls were impenetrable and that his city's reputation as a center of the Islamic world would deter invaders, failed to prepare adequately. His appeals for military assistance from neighboring states went unanswered, and Baghdad was left to face the Mongols alone. The siege began with the Mongols surrounding the city, cutting off its supplies and isolating its population. For days, Baghdad's defenders valiantly manned its walls, raining arrows and stones on the advancing enemy. But Hulagu's forces brought to bear an array of siege weapons, including huge trebuchets capable of hurling stones and incendiary bombs. This relentless bombardment tore through Baghdad's defenses, leaving the walls breached and the city vulnerable. On February 10th, the Mongols stormed the ruins, and what followed was a massacre on an unimaginable scale. The Mongols unleashed their wrath upon the city. Men, women, and children were slaughtered without mercy. The streets of Baghdad ran red with blood, and the Tigris River turned black with the ink of countless books and manuscripts thrown into its waters. The House of Wisdom, a legendary library that had preserved centuries of knowledge, was completely destroyed. Scholars, poets, and scientists, some of the greatest minds of the age, were executed or lost in the chaos. Hulagu reportedly ordered the Caliph himself to be trampled to death, a grim symbol of the end of the Abbasid dynasty. When the siege ended, the once vibrant city was reduced to a smoldering ruin. Contemporary accounts estimated that up to 2 million people lost their lives, though the exact numbers remain debated. The cultural and intellectual loss was incalculable, marking the end of an era. The Mongols left behind a ghost town, and Baghdad would not regain its former glory for centuries. The siege of Baghdad remains a harrowing reminder of the destructive power of war. It marked not just the fall of a city, but the end of a golden age. Yet amid the ruins, the human spirit endured, and the lessons of history remain etched in the memories of civilizations. World War II. The years 1942 and 1943 were the turning point of the Second World War, a period of unimaginable suffering and sacrifice when the tide of conflict began to turn. From the icy plains of Stalingrad to the scorching jungles of the Pacific, the world was engulfed in violence on a scale never before witnessed. This was a time of desperation and defiance, when nations threw every ounce of strength they had into the fight for survival. Ultimately, this chapter of the war was defined by two theaters, the Eastern Front and the Pacific War. Both would take millions of lives, altering the course of history for. In the Soviet Union, the Battle of Stalingrad raged from late 1942 to early 1943. This was no ordinary battle. It was a clash of ideologies, a fight for survival between Hitler's Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. German forces, having advanced deep into Soviet territory, sought to capture the city that bore Stalin's name. Stalingrad was more than a strategic target. It was a symbol of Soviet resilience. As the Germans launched devastating airstrikes and advanced on the city, Soviet soldiers and civilians mounted a desperate defense. Street by street, building by building, they fought brutal hand-to-hand combat, often resorting to hand-to-hand combat. The harsh Russian winter became a deadly ally for the Soviet. German troops, ill-prepared for the freezing temperatures and stretched supply lines, began to falter. In November 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus, encircling the German 6th. Trapped and without reinforcements, the Germans endured months of starvation and relentless Soviet attacks. In February 1943, what remained of the 6th Army, Stalingrad became the graveyard of Hitler's ambitions in the East, marking the beginning of the German retreat. However, victory came at an unimaginable cost. More than 2 million soldiers and civilians perished in the bloodiest battle in human history. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the United States and Japan were facing off in a series of fierce battles. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States was reeling, but by mid-1942, it began to fight back. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a turning. American forces, using superior intelligence, ambushed the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 of its aircraft carriers and crippling Japan's naval. This victory turned the tide, allowing the Allies to go on the offensive. The Guadalcanal campaign, which began in August 1942, was a grueling test of endurance and determination. In the dense jungles of the Solomon Islands, U.S. Marines fought Japanese troops in conditions as deadly as the enemy. Disease, starvation, and the relentless heat claimed as many lives as the. In February 1943, the Allies emerged victorious, marking the first significant ground victory against Japan. However, the cost of these campaigns was staggering, with hundreds of thousands of lives lost on both sides. As the war progressed, the death toll mounted. Civilians bore the brunt of the suffering, with entire cities destroyed by air raids, forced labor camps engulfing millions, and the horrors of genocide unfolding across Nazi-occupied. These years of unrelenting violence pushed humanity to its breaking point, but they also paved the way for the eventual Allied victory. Although millions perished, the sacrifices of those who lived and fought during these dark years laid the foundation for the eventual liberation of Europe and the Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, fought between August 1942 and February 1943, was a clash of titanic proportions, the likes of which the world had never seen. This battle, fought in the cold, shattered remains of a once thriving city on the banks of the Volga River, became the turning point of the Second World War. It was a war within a brutal, relentless struggle for survival, fought not just by armies but by ordinary citizens caught in the crossfire. More than 2 million lives would be claimed in a hellish landscape of rubble and ruins. In the summer of 1942, Adolf Hitler set his sights on Stalingrad. To him, it was more than just a strategic city. It was named after his greatest enemy, Joseph Stalin, and its capture would serve as both a symbolic and logistical triumph. Stalingrad was an industrial hub, its factories churning out weapons and supplies for the Soviet war effort. Capturing it would also provide access to the oil-rich Caucasus region. Buoyed by their victories in the early months of Operation Barbarossa, German forces advanced on the city with ruthless efficiency. The German Luftwaffe unleashed a firestorm on Stalingrad, reducing much of it to rubble. But in doing so, they created the perfect battlefield for the Soviet defenders. The ruined city became a maze of sniper nests, booby traps, and ambush points. Soviet soldiers, alongside the city's residents, put up a fierce resistance. Moscow's mantra was simple: not a step back. Stalin issued Order 227, forbidding retreat and reinforcing the Red Army's resolve. Street fighting defined Stalingrad. Soldiers fought room by room, floor by floor, in what came to be known as the Rattenkrieg, or Rat War. The iconic tractor factory, the grain elevator, and Pavlov's house became legendary battlegrounds, with every inch fought costing countless lives. Faced with overwhelming German firepower, the Soviet defenders desperately held on to their positions. Reinforcements and supplies were brought across the Volga River, often under deadly artillery and aerial bombardment. Each crossing was a gamble with death, but Soviet resolve never wavered. As the harsh Russian winter approached, the tide began to turn. In November 1942, the Soviet High Command launched Operation Uranus, a masterstroke of strategy. Soviet forces encircled the German Sixth Army and its allies, cutting them off from reinforcements. The trap was sprung, and over 300,000 Axis troops found themselves surrounded. The encircled Germans faced starvation, freezing temperatures, and relentless Soviet attacks. The air-drop supplies from the Luftwaffe proved woefully inadequate, and morale plummeted as the reality of their situation became clear. By January 1943, the once mighty Sixth Army was a shadow of its former self. Emaciated and desperate, the surviving German soldiers fought on, clinging to the hope that relief would come. But no help came. On the 2nd February 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, having been promoted by Hitler to prevent surrender, defied orders and capitulated. The surrender marked the first time that a German field marshal had been captured alive. The remaining pockets of resistance crumbled, and the battle came to a grim end. The cost of victory was staggering. Stalingrad was reduced to a desert, its population decimated, its buildings destroyed. More than 2 million people, soldiers and civilians alike, were killed, wounded, or captured. The psychological and strategic impact of the battle was profound. For the Soviets, it was a moment of triumph that turned the tide of the war in their favor. For the Germans, it marked the beginning of their slow and inexorable retreat. The Battle of Stalingrad is regarded as one of the most brutal engagements in history. It was a struggle of human endurance and the will to survive against overwhelming odds. In the frozen ruins of that city, the course of World War III and the fate of the world was irrevocably altered.